A giant cowboy paid $3 for an 18-year-old virgin bride. But that night, instead of claiming her, he fell to his knees and wept in front of the fire. The dusty rail town jeered when she was sold, she mocked as worthless. Left trembling in shame, the giant cowboy took her away, and everyone thought they knew what came next. But when the door shut and the lamplight flickered, everything changed. He wasn't the monster they feared. He was a man haunted by loneliness, holding back tears, praying for mercy. Yet out beyond the cabin walls, danger was already closing in. A ruthless gambler wanted their land. And her past was tangled in his cruel hands. The law would not protect them. Fire and vengeance threatened to tear their fragile bond apart. She was bought for $3. He knelt in tears. But when the railroad comes to claim their only water, will mercy be enough to save them both? Every story I share leads with love for people, for healing, for the things we sometimes forget to say out loud. The wagon wheels creaked as Lucas guided the horses away from the crowded town square. Anna perched stiffly on the wooden seat. Beside him, her thin shawl pulled tight around her shoulders despite the lingering warmth of the summer evening. The jeers and laughter from the crowd still rang in her ears, making her cheeks burn with shame. Got yourself a real bargain there? Giant, someone called up behind them. Anna flinched at the words, shrinking further into herself. Lucas kept his eyes forward, his large hands steady on the reins. The muscles in his jaw tightened, but he said nothing. His silence made Anna's heart thunder harder in her chest. What kind of man bought a bride for just $3? The thought made her stomach clench. The wagon rattled past the last buildings of town, kicking up dust as they headed toward the purple shadows of the Wyoming hills. Anna tried to steady her trembling hands in her lap, but every bump in the road made her jump. She stole quick glances at the man beside her, taking in his massive frame. His broad shoulders stretched the fabric of his clean work shirt, and his hat brim cast deep shadows across his face in the fading light. The distant howl of a coyote made Anna start. Lucas turned his head slightly, his voice surprisingly gentle. When he spoke, "Don't fret none about them. They won't come near the wagon." His deep voice carried no mockery, but Anna couldn't bring herself to respond. Her father's gambling debts had brought her to this, sold like cattle to a stranger in a foreign land. The memory of the auctioneer's loud voice still echoed in her mind. Next up, Anna Walsh. Damaged goods? Folks, her pa's debts follow this one. Who'll start the bidding? The wagon hit a particularly rough patch, and Anna grabbed the seat's edge to steady herself. Lucas automatically reached out to steady her, but stopped short of touching her when she shrank away. "My apologies, miss," he said quietly, returning his hand to the reins. "Didn't mean to frighten you." Anna nodded jerkily, still unable to find her voice. The sun was sinking faster now, painting the sky in deep oranges and reds. Her heart began to race faster as darkness crept in. Soon they would reach wherever this giant of a man called home, and then Lucas cleared his throat. "Got about another hour's ride ahead of us. Ranch is up in those hills yonder." He gestured with his chin toward the darkening landscape. "You warm enough?" "Yes, sir," Anna whispered, her first words to him. Her voice sounded thin and frightened, even to her own ears. "Name's Lucas," he said. "No need for sir." After a pause, he added, "I know this ain't what you wanted. Being sold off like that, it ain't right." Anna's throat tightened at his words. She blinked rapidly, fighting back tears that threatened to spill. The wagon wheels continued their steady rhythm as they climbed higher into the hills. "Why?" The words slipped out before she could stop it. "Why only $3? Lucas was quiet, for so long that Anna thought he hadn't heard her. Finally he spoke, his voice low and thoughtful. "Figured those men bidding high. They weren't looking to treat you proper? The more they bid, the more they whooped and hollered." He shook his head. Thought maybe if I bid low enough, they'd lose interest. Worked, didn't it? Anna processed this, stealing another look at his profile. His explanation made a strange kind of sense, though it did little to ease her fears about what awaited her. The wagon rounded a bend, and Lucas pointed to a flicker of light in the distance. That there's the ranch house. Got a proper room fixed up for you, lock on the door and everything. Anna's head snapped up at this, surprise momentarily overwhelming her fear. A lock? Lucas nodded, keeping his eyes on the trail. Yes, key's yours to keep. I may have bought you according to the law, but you ain't property. You're a person, made in God's image, same as anyone else. Fresh tears welled in Anna's eyes, but these were different from before. The knot in her chest loosened just a fraction. The words, made in God's image, touched something deep inside her. Words she hadn't heard since her mother passed years ago dot as they drew closer to the ranch house. Anna could make out more details in the gathering dusk. It was a solid structure, not fancy, but well-maintained, with a neat front porch and smoke curling from the chimney. A barn stood off to one side, and a chicken coop was visible near what looked like a vegetable garden. Lucas brought the wagon to a stop near the house. Before he could climb down, the front door opened, spilling warm lamplight onto the porch. An elderly woman stepped out, wiping her hands on her apron. There you are, Lucas was starting to worry. The woman's voice trailed off as she spotted Anna. Her face softened into a kind smile. Well, now you must be frozen stiff from the ride. Come on in, dear. I've got soup keeping warm on the stove. Anna looked uncertainly at Lucas, who nodded encouragingly. That's Mrs. Peterson. She helps keep house here since my ma passed. Stays in the little cabin out back. Mrs. Peterson clucked her tongue. Don't just sit there like fence posts, you two. That soup won't eat itself. For the first time since the auction, Anna felt something close to hope flutter in her chest. Lucas climbed down and came around to her side of the wagon, offering his hand but keeping a respectful distance. Your choice, he said quietly, but you're welcome here, Miss Anna. Truly. Anna looked at his outstretched hand, then at the warm light spilling from the doorway where Mrs. Peterson waited. Slowly, she placed her trembling fingers in Lucas's massive palm. His grip was gentle as he helped her down from the wagon, releasing her hand the moment her feet touched the ground. The evening air had grown cooler, and the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky, as Anna followed Lucas and Mrs. Peterson. Toward the house, she realized her steps felt steadier than they had all day. She was still afraid, still uncertain of what the future held. But something in Lucas's quiet strength and evident respect gave her courage to put one foot in front of the other. The door closed behind them, shutting out the gathering night and the memory of those jeering voices in town. The warmth of the house wrapped around Anna like a blanket, carrying with it the comforting smell of fresh bread and beef soup. Mrs. Peterson was already bustling about, setting the table for three, while Lucas hung his hat on a peg by the door. Wagon jolted along the rutted trail, each bump making Anna's heart leap into her throat. The setting sun painted long shadows across the land, turning the Wyoming hills into dark sentinels against the dimming sky. She couldn't help but stare at Lucas's massive hands as they gripped the leather reins, hands that could easily break her, she thought with a shiver. That there's Crow Peak, Lucas said, breaking the heavy silence. He pointed to a jagged ridge silhouetted against the orange sky. Good landmark if you ever need finding your way. His deep voice was soft, almost hesitant, but Anna couldn't bring herself to respond. Her throat felt too tight for words. The wooden wagon wheels creaked as they navigated another steep section of trail. A cool wind swept down from the heights, making Anna pull her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders. Lucas glanced her way. You cold, miss? When she didn't answer, he reached behind the seat and pulled out a rough wool blanket. Here, he said, holding it out while keeping his eyes on the trail. Anna took it with trembling fingers, careful not to touch his hand. The blanket smelled of horses and leather, but it was warm. Darkness crept across the land like spilled ink. In the distance, coyotes began their evening chorus, their wild songs making Anna's skin prickle with fear. She clutched the blanket tighter, trying to make herself smaller on the wide wagon seat. We'll need to rest the horses soon, Lucas said, as the last light faded from the sky. Been a long day for them. True to his word, he pulled the wagon off the trail about an hour later. finding a relatively flat spot beneath a stand of cottonwoods. The horse's harnesses jingled as he climbed, down to tend to them. Anna remained frozen on the seat, watching his massive shadow move in the darkness. A small fire soon sparked to life under his careful attention. The flames cast flickering light across his face as he rummaged in his saddlebags. "Ain't much," he said, pulling out a cloth-wrapped package. "But you're welcome to share." He offered her a piece of cornbread and some jerky, setting them on the wagon seat beside her when she didn't reach for them. The food might as well have been stones. Anna's stomach was too knotted with anxiety to even consider eating. Lucas moved with deliberate slowness as he spread 2 bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire. "This one's yours," he said, pointing to the one furthest from his own. "Got another blanket if you need it." He settled himself on his own bedroll, keeping the fire between them. Anna remained in the wagon for a long while, watching him through the flames. He didn't press her to move, just sat quietly, occasionally adding small sticks to the fire. Finally, cold and exhaustion won out over fear. She climbed down stiffly, her legs unsteady from the long day's ride. The night passed in fits and starts for Anna, every snapping twig making her jerk awake. Lucas didn't move from his spot across the fire, his breathing deep and even. The coyotes sang their wild songs in the distance, but as he'd promised earlier, they kept their distance from the camp. Dawn broke pale and clear, painting the sky in delicate pinks and golds. Lucas was already up, having rekindled the fire and set coffee to boil in a battered tin pot. He offered her a cup without speaking, then began hitching the horses back to the wagon. They resumed their journey as the sun climbed higher. The town now nothing more than a distant memory on the vast plains below. Anna's whole body ached from the previous day's travel, but she kept her discomfort to herself. The trail wound higher into the hills, threading through stands of pine trees that filled the air with their sharp, clean scent as the second evening approached. Lucas guided the wagon around a final bend. "There it is," he said quietly. "Home." Anna's heart began to pound as she took in the sight. A log cabin sat nestled against a grove of tall pines, smoke rising in a thin line from its stone chimney. A small barn stood off to one side, with a corral and what looked like a vegetable garden nearby. It was a sturdy place, well built and maintained, but all Anna could think about was what waited for her inside those walls. Lucas brought the wagon to a stop near the cabin door. The shadows were growing long again, and a cool breeze carried the scent of pine needles and wood smoke. He climbed down and came around to her side, offering his hand but not insisting when she ignored it to climb down on her own. "Let me get your trunk," he said, moving to the back of the wagon. Anna watched as he lifted the heavy wooden box with surprising care, handling it as if it contained something precious instead of her few meager possessions. The cabin door creaked as he pushed it open with his shoulder. Lamplight spilled out, revealing rough-hewn walls and simple furniture, a table with 2 chairs, a cook stove, some shelves with dishes. A curtain hung across one corner, presumably hiding a bed from view. Anna's legs felt like lead as she followed him inside. The door closed behind them with a soft thud that seemed to echo in her ears like a prison gate closing. She stood rigid, her back pressed against the rough wood. As Lucas set her trunk down near the curtained corner, the lamp flickered, sending shadows dancing across the walls. Lucas straightened up slowly, keeping his distance as he faced her. "That corner's yours," he said softly. "Got it fixed up best I could." There's a lock on the door to the bedroom. Keys on the dresser inside. He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "I know this ain't what you wanted, miss. But you're safe here. You have my word on that." Anna remained pressed against the door, her heart thundering in her chest as she waited for him to show his true nature, to demand his rights as her purchaser. But Lucas simply removed his hat, hung it on a peg by the door, and moved to stoke the fire in the cook stove. "Must be hungry after the long ride," he said, his back to her as he worked. "Got some stew warming. You're welcome to it when you're ready." The lamplight continued to flicker, casting uncertain shadows. In the quiet cabin, as they both waited to see what this strange new arrangement would bring, The cabin's interior wrapped Anna in warmth tinged with the sharp scent of pine. Wood smoke. Her legs trembled as she perched on the edge of the rough-hewn bench, watching Lucas's broad back as he tended the fire. The flames cast dancing shadows across the walls, making his massive frame seem even larger. Every movement he made cost her to flinch slightly, though he handled each task with careful deliberation. The kettle hanging over the fire began to sing softly, its whistle growing steadier as the water heated. "Would you care for some tea, miss?" Lucas's voice was barely above a whisper, as if he feared startling her. When she didn't respond, he continued his work, measuring dried leaves into 2 tin cups with hands that seemed too large for such delicate work. Anna's heart hammered against her ribs as Lucas moved closer to the hearth. She gripped the edge of the bench until her knuckles turned white, expecting him to finally show his true nature. Instead, he lowered himself to his knees before the fire, his head bowing low. The sight of such a large man kneeling made her breath catch. Then, to her complete astonishment, his broad shoulders began to shake. The sound that escaped him was unlike anything she'd expected, not anger or demands, but the broken sound of weeping. "Lord," Lucas's voice cracked as he prayed aloud, "I thank you for your mercy today." "Thank you for letting me reach that square in time." His words caught on a sob. "Thank you for sparing this innocent girl from those drunkards who would have." He couldn't finish the thought. Anna sat frozen, unable to process what she was witnessing. This giant of a man, whom she'd feared would be her tormentor, was on his knees weeping. "Forgive my selfishness, Lord," he continued, his voice thick with tears. "These years of loneliness have worn so heavy. But I swear before you, only to protect her. Help me be worthy of that trust." A small cry escaped Anna's lips before she could stop it. Lucas's head snapped up, his cheeks wet with tears. Their eyes met across the firelit room, and Anna saw something she hadn't noticed before, a deep well of gentleness in his gaze. "Miss Anna," he said softly, remaining on his knees but turning to face her. "I realize now I should have explained sooner. You have nothing to fear from me." He wiped roughly at his cheeks with the back of his hand. "I couldn't bear to see them. Auction you to those men. Not after." He swallowed hard. "Not after seeing the fear in your eyes." Anna's own tears began to fall as understanding slowly dawned. "You bought me? To protect me?" Lucas nodded, his expression pained. "I know it's not proper. I know it's not what you would have chosen. But I swear to you, you're safe here. I'll never." His voice broke again. "I'll never touch you without your permission. Never demand anything you're not willing to give." The reality of his words crashed over Anna like a wave. All the terror she'd been holding since the auction square began to crumble, replaced by a confusion so profound it made her dizzy. This man, this stranger who'd purchased her for $3, had done so not to use her, but to save her. "I need." She stood on shaking legs. "I need to." Unable to finish the sentence, she fled to the small ladder leading to the loft bed he'd shown her earlier. "Of course," Lucas said quietly. "Take all the time you need." Once in the safety of the loft, Anna collapsed onto the narrow bed. Tears flowed freely now as relief warred with confusion in her heart. The soft sound of Lucas moving below reached her ears. The quiet clink of him setting the teacups aside. The creak of floorboards as he settled himself by the hearth. Mountain wind picked up outside, rattling the shutters against the cabin walls. Anna pulled the quilt around her shoulders, her mind spinning with the events of the day. Everything she thought she knew about her situation had been upended. The man she'd feared would be her jailer had turned out to be her protector. Through the gaps in the floorboards, she could see Lucas laying out his bedroll near the now cooling hearth. Even in repose, he seemed too large for the space, yet there was something unbearably humble about the way he curled on his side, making himself smaller. Both lay awake in the darkness, each pondering what this strange marriage now meant. Anna's tears gradually slowed as exhaustion took hold. The wind continued its lonely song outside, but inside the cabin, a fragile peace began to settle as the night wore on. The first pale fingers of dawn began to creep through the cracks between the logs. The gray light painted stripes across the cabin's interior, touching both the giant sleeping by the cold hearth and the young woman in the loft above. Neither had expected this turn of events, yet here they were, at the threshold of a new life neither could have imagined. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the cabin's small windows as Anna crept down the ladder from her loft. Her footsteps were cautious on the wooden rungs, still uncertain of her place in this strange new home. The sound of rhythmic chopping drew her attention to the door, which stood slightly ajar in the crisp morning air. Outside, Lucas worked at splitting kindling, his powerful arms bringing down the axe in measured strokes. His shirt stretched across broad shoulders as he worked, yet there was a gentleness to his movements that seemed at odds with his size. When he noticed her watching from the doorway, he paused, carefully setting the axe aside. "Good morning, Miss Anna," he said softly, wiping his brow with a sleeve. "I hope the bed was comfortable enough." Anna nodded, wrapping her arms around herself against the morning chill. "Yes, thank you. I've got some eggs and beans warming on the stove, if you're hungry." He gestured toward the cabin, maintaining a respectful distance as he followed her inside. The morning meal passed in near silence, broken only by the quiet scrape of spoons against tin plates. Anna watched from beneath lowered lashes as Lucas bowed his head in silent prayer before eating. His movements were measured as if he was constantly aware of how his size might frighten her. When the dishes were cleared, Lucas cleared his throat. "Miss Anna, there's something we need to discuss." He settled into a chair across the table, keeping space between them. "I want you to understand something important. You're not my prisoner here." Anna's head snapped up, her eyes wide with surprise. "What happened yesterday?" Lucas's voice grew rough with emotion. "It wasn't right, how they treated you. But I don't aim to continue that wrong by keeping you here against your will." He met her gaze steadily. "You can stay here, under my protection, for as long as you wish. Or, if you choose to leave, I won't stop you." The words hung in the air between them. Anna's hands trembled in her lap as she processed this unexpected offer of freedom. I don't understand," she whispered. "It's simple enough," Lucas said gently. "This is your choice to make, not mine." Before Anna could respond, Lucas stood. "Come with me. There's something you need to learn if you're going to live out here, whether you stay or go." He led her to the barn where gentle Mare stood saddled. Anna stepped back instinctively, but Lucas held up a calming hand. "Don't be afraid. Out here, knowing how to ride isn't just useful, it's necessary." With patient hands, he showed her how to approach the horse, how to hold the reins, how to settle into the saddle. His instructions were clear and simple, his voice steady as he led the mare in slow circles around the clearing. Anna's initial fear gradually gave way to tentative excitement as she learned to balance in the saddle. "There you go," Lucas encouraged as she completed her third circle. "You're a natural." By midday, Anna's muscles ached from the unfamiliar activity, but a small sense of accomplishment had taken root. They returned to the cabin, where Lucas carried in her trunk from the wagon. "Best get you settled proper," he said. Setting it carefully by the wall, Anna knelt beside the trunk, running her fingers over its worn surface before opening it. Inside lay her whole life, 3 simple dresses, carefully folded. A Bible with its leather cover cracked with age, and her mother's worn shawl. The only thing she had left of home. As she lifted each item out, memories threatened to overwhelm her. Lucas busied himself across the room, obviously trying to give her privacy with her emotions. The afternoon passed quietly as Anna found places for her few possessions. When evening approached, Lucas lit the lamps and settled in a corner with some damaged tack that needed mending. Anna found her sewing basket and began working on a torn seam in one of her dresses. The familiar motion of needle and thread helped calm her racing thoughts. Occasionally, she glanced at Lucas, noting how he kept to his side of the cabin. His large hands working carefully with the leather straps dot the domesticity of the scene. struck her suddenly. How ordinary it felt, sitting here in the lamplight with this man who was by law her husband. Yet he treated her more like a sister in need of protection than a purchased bride. There was no demand in his manner, no expectation of rights bought with those $3 when night fell fully. Lucas once again made his bed near the banked fire, leaving Anna's loft as her private sanctuary. She climbed the ladder, her mind churning with the day's events. The choice he'd given her weighed heavy on her thoughts. Stay or go, freedom or protection, trust or fear. Lying in her bed, listening to the quiet sounds of Lucas settling below, Anna found herself caught between competing emotions. Fear still lingered at the edges of her mind, born of bitter experience and betrayal. Yet something else was taking root alongside it. The first tentative shoots of trust, nourished by Lucas's quiet respect and gentle patience. The night wrapped around the cabin like a thick blanket, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. Anna pulled her mother's shawl closer, its familiar weave offering comfort as she pondered the choice before her. Stay or go, trust or run. The decision would wait until morning, but for now, she allowed herself to feel something she hadn't expected. Peace in the presence of a giant who slept below, guarding her dreams without claiming them as his own. Afternoon sun streamed through the cabin windows as Anna worked at the rough-hewn table, her hands deep in bread dough. Flour dusted her apron while she kneaded, finding comfort in the familiar motions. Lucas had shown her where he kept the flour barrel and sourdough starter that morning, his eyes crinkling with appreciation when she offered to bake. The rhythmic sound of her kneading filled the quiet cabin. Outside, birds called from the pines, and the spring's gentle burble drifted up from the hollow. Anna was just pressing the dough into a bowl to rise when hoofbeats approached from the trail. Lucas stepped in from where he'd been mending fence. "Riders coming," he said quietly, moving to stand near the door. 3 horses appeared around the bend, 2 riders in front, another hanging back in their dust. Anna wiped her hands on her apron, stepping closer to Lucas as the sheriff's badge caught the sunlight. The second rider sat tall in an expensive saddle, his clothes marking him as a wealthy rancher. But it was the third rider who made Anna's heart stop. That familiar twisted smile, the fancy vest, the way he tilted his head. She would know him anywhere. James Blackwood, the gambler who had stripped her father of everything, including his dignity. The man whose manipulations had led her to that auction block. "Afternoon, Creed," Sheriff Danvers called out, reining his horse to a stop. He touched the brim of his hat toward Anna. "Ma'am." The rancher produced a folded paper from his coat. "Got some business to discuss, Creed. Railroads filing claim on that spring of yours and the south portion of your land." Lucas accepted the document with steady hands, though Anna saw the muscle in his jaw tighten. "Bet so?" "Survey crews marked it last month," the rancher continued. "Railroad needs the water rights for the new spur line. Everything's legal and proper. Just giving you fair notice." Blackwood urged his horse forward, that cruel smile widening when Anna shrank back. "Well, if it isn't little Anna Moore, or I suppose it's Anna Creed now." His voice dripped with false courtesy. "Quite. A step up from that auction block, isn't it?" Lucas's massive frame shifted slightly, placing himself between Anna and Blackwood's mocking gaze. "You've delivered your notice, gentlemen. I'll be reviewing it with proper counsel." "Don't waste your money fighting it, Creed," the rancher warned. "Railroad's got an army of lawyers. That spring's going to be powering steam engines by winter. We'll see about that." Lucas's voice remained level, but Anna heard the steel beneath it. "Good day to you." Sheriff Danvers seemed uncomfortable, glancing between them. "You've been served proper notice, Lucas. Any response needs to come through official channels." The 3 riders turned their mounts, but Blackwood lingered a moment longer. "Give my regards to your father, Miss Anna. Oh, wait, he's probably still hiding from his creditors back east." His laugh floated back as he rode away. Anna's legs gave out as soon as they disappeared around the bend. Lucas caught her before she could fall, helping her to a chair. Her hands shook as she pressed them against her face. "Anna," Lucas's voice was gentle. What was that about? The whole story poured out between sobs, how Blackwood had befriended her father, encouraging his weakness for cards and drink, how he'd extended credit, then called in the debts at just the right moment to take their home, how he'd suggested her father could clear his debt by selling his only daughter's marriage contract to the Frontier Bride Market. Father couldn't even look at me when he signed the papers, she whispered. Blackwood watched with that same smile he wore today. Thought I'd fetch a fine price out west. Lucas's hands gripped the back of a chair so hard the wood creaked. For a long moment only, the sound of the spring drifting up from the hollow broke the silence. No one's taking this land, he finally said, his voice rough with emotion. And no one's going to hurt you again. Not while I draw a breath. Anna looked up at him through tear-blurred eyes. But the railroad doesn't own everything. Yet, Lucas picked up the legal notice, studying it. This land was deeded proper. That spring's been watering stock since before the territory was formed. We'll fight it, legal and right. The rest of the afternoon passed in heavy silence. The bread dough overapproved and collapsed, forgotten its bowl. Neither of them felt much like eating when evening came. They sat in their usual places, Lucas in his chair by the fire, Anna on the bench, listening to the pop and crackle of burning pine. Through the open window, the spring's gentle music rose from the hollow steady and sure as it had been for countless years. Anna watched shadows dance across Lucas's troubled face and felt something shift in her heart. This wasn't just his fight anymore. That spring, this cabin, somehow they had become her home too. And she would not let Blackwood destroy another home. The morning after Blackwood's visit dawned clear and cool. Lucas found Anna already awake, staring at the spring from the cabin's small porch. Her shoulders were set with determination that hadn't been there before. Reckon it's time you learned about ranch life, Lucas said quietly, coming to stand beside her. If you're willing. Anna turned to him, chin lifted. Show me everything. They started with the spring itself. Lucas led her down the gentle slope to where crystal water bubbled from the earth, explaining how the underground source never ran dry, even in drought years. He demonstrated how to draw water without muddying the banks, his huge hands gentle on the wooden bucket. Like this? Anna asked, copying his movements. The bucket was heavy, but she managed not to spill. Just right. Lucas's approval warmed her cheeks. That's good water there, sweet and clean. Sustains everything on this land. Next came fence mending. Lucas showed her how to test posts for rot, replace split rails, and string new wire. Anna's soft hands soon bore blisters, but she didn't complain. Each skill learned felt like putting down roots, claiming her place on this land. When Lucas brought out the rifle, Anna's heart jumped. The long barrel gleamed dully in the sunlight as he explained its parts. Every ranch woman should know how to handle one, he said, showing her how to check if it was loaded. Not just for protection. Sometimes you need to take down a sick animal, or ward off predators. Anna's hands trembled as she lifted it. The weapon felt alien and dangerous. It's too heavy, she whispered. You'll get stronger. Lucas adjusted her grip patiently. Just focus on respect for the tool. Never point it at anything you don't intend to shoot. They practiced with tin cans on fence posts. Anna flinched at every shot, but gradually her aim improved. By the end of the lesson, she had knocked 3 cans into the grass. The days fell into a rhythm. They rose at dawn to tend the animals together. Lucas taught her to curry the horses and milk the cow, his deep voice explaining each task with careful detail. Anna learned to recognize the different birds by their calls, to predict weather from cloud patterns, to spot deer trails in the underbrush between. Lessons. There was endless work. They cleared brush from the fence lines, Anna wielding a smaller saw while Lucas swung his axe. They stacked firewood for winter, the pile growing slowly but steadily. Anna cooked their meals, simple fare of beans and cornbread. Sometimes with fresh game, Lucas brought home Dot to her surprise. Small moments of joy began creeping in. One morning, her first attempt at biscuits came out hard as rocks. Lucas solemnly suggested using them for ammunition, and Anna found herself laughing out loud. The sound startled them both. Another day, Lucas's stubborn mule refused to be led to water. Anna watched him reasoning with the animal like it was a person, until she couldn't help giggling. A smile tugged at Lucas's mouth too, the first she'd seen. As Saturday evening approached, Lucas cleared his throat during supper. "Tomorrow's Sunday," he said. "I usually ride in for church services. Would you care to come along?" Anna's stomach tightened. She hadn't faced the town since the auction. The thought of those stares and whispers made her want to hide. But then she thought of Blackwood's sneering face. She wouldn't cower anymore? "Yes," she said firmly. "I would like that." Sunday morning, Anna rose early. She pulled her best calico dress from her trunk, shaking out the wrinkles. The blue fabric was faded but clean, with tiny white flowers scattered across it. She twisted her hair into a neat bun, pinning it carefully. When she came downstairs, Lucas was waiting in his good shirt and string tie. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of her, though he said nothing. He had the wagon hitched already. The horses brushed till they shone. Anna smoothed her skirt nervously. Part of her still wanted to retreat to the safety of the cabin. But Lucas offered his arm with grave courtesy, and she took it, letting him help her up to the wagon seat. Morning was bright and cool as they set out. Aspen leaves flickered silver in the breeze, and late wildflowers dotted the grass. Anna sat straight back beside Lucas, determined to face whatever waited in town with dignity. "You look nice," Lucas said suddenly, his voice gruff, Anna's cheeks warmed. "Thank you." She glanced at his profile, noting how his Sunday clothes transformed him from a rough rancher to something more genteel. "You do too." They rode on in comfortable silence, the wagon wheels creaking beneath them. Anna found herself studying the trail, marking how different it looked from that first frightening night journey. Now she recognized landmarks the lightning struck. Pine, the oddly shaped boulder, the creek crossing where wild mint grew. The sound of church bells drifted up from the valley as they approached town. Anna's hands clenched in her lap, but she kept her head high. Whatever gossip or judgment awaited, she would face it beside Lucas. They were no longer just the giant and his bargain bride. They were partners now, learning to trust, building something neither had expected. Lucas drew the wagon to a halt in front of the white-painted church. Other families were arriving too, nodding greetings as they passed. Taking a deep breath, Anna prepared to step into this wider world beyond their peaceful cabin. Lucas's strong hand appeared to help her down, and she took it without hesitation. The little white church sat nestled among cottonwoods, its fresh paint gleaming in the morning sun. As Lucas helped Anna down from the wagon, the bell began to toll, each deep note echoing across the town square. Anna smoothed her calico dress one last time. Gathering her courage, they climbed the wooden steps together, Lucas's tall frame casting a long shadow. At the door, heads turned and conversation stopped. Anna felt the weight of every stare as Lucas guided her down the aisle with a gentle hand at her elbow. Whispers followed them like rustling leaves. From the corner of her eye, Anna caught sight of Mrs. Peterson, the banker's wife, pressing close to her neighbor's ear. "Poor thing," the woman murmured, not bothering to lower her voice. "Bought for $3, can you imagine?" Another voice drifted from across the aisle. "Probably all she's worth with her father's reputation." Lucas's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He simply led Anna to an empty pew near the middle of the church, stepping aside so she could slide in first. The solid warmth of his presence beside her felt like a shield against the judgmental stares. The preacher called them to worship, and the organist struck up the opening notes of Amazing Grace. Anna's hands trembled as she accepted a hymnal from Lucas. When the congregation began to sing, she joined in, her voice barely above a whisper at first. The familiar words steadied her, and gradually her voice grew stronger. "Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me." Lucas's deep bass rumbled beside her, surprisingly gentle for such a large man. Together, their voices blended with the congregation, and for a moment, Anna felt almost at peace. The feeling didn't last long. After the final amen, church ladies descended like hawks. Mrs. Peterson led the charge, her face arranged in a mask of false sympathy. "My dear," she said, cornering Anna by the church steps. We were all so concerned when that situation happened at the auction. Such a dreadful business. I do hope you're managing to adjust to your circumstances. Before Anna could respond, another woman chimed in. Though I suppose any roof is better than none, even if you were bought cheap. Anna's cheeks blazed with shame. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Then Lucas's towering form appeared beside her, his shadow falling across the gathered women. "Ladies," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the churchyard. Every head turned toward them. "I'd like you to meet my wife," Anna creed. God joined us under his eye. The simple declaration rang with quiet authority. Mrs. Peterson's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. The other gossips fell silent, suddenly finding great interest in their prayer books, and Bonnets. Lucas offered Anna his arm. "Shall we head home, Mrs. Creed?" Something warm bloomed in Anna's chest at the name. She slipped her hand into the crook of his elbow, lifting her chin. "Yes, let's go home." They walked to their wagon with measured steps, ignoring the stairs. Bat followed them. Lucas helped her up to the seat with the same careful courtesy he'd shown that morning. As they pulled away from the church, Anna caught glimpses of people still watching. But their whispers no longer seemed to matter quite so much. The afternoon sun painted the hills in shades of gold as they traveled homeward. The familiar creak of wagon wheels and the steady clip-clop of hooves filled the comfortable silence between them. Anna found herself leaning against the wooden armrest near Lucas's side, the morning's tension draining away with each mile. When they finally reached the cabin, the shadows were long across the yard. Lucas helped her down, then surprised her by taking both her hands in his enormous ones. "Thank you," he said softly, "for coming today, for your courage." Anna looked up at him, seeing the sincerity in his weathered face. "Thank you," she whispered. "Back, for defending me, for making me Anna Creed instead of just the bargain bride." Something flickered in Lucas's eyes. Pain, perhaps, or anger at how she'd been treated. But his voice remained gentle. "You were never just anything. Get some. Rest now. You've earned it." That night, Anna climbed to her loft, feeling different somehow. The cabin that had once seemed like a prison now felt like shelter. The name Anna Creed echoed in her mind as she drifted off to sleep, no longer a mark of shame, but a promise of belonging. Her dreams were peaceful for the first time since the auction. She dreamed of hymns sung in harmony, of strong hands offering protection, of a place where she was no longer alone. And through it all ran the steady certainty that she was home. The morning sun cast long shadows across the yard when three men rode up to Lucas's cabin. Their polished boots and city suits marked them as railroad men, a stark contrast to the rustic cabin and surrounding wilderness. Anna watched from behind the curtain as Lucas met them on the porch, his broad shoulders squared against the morning light. "Mr. Creed," the leader said, removing his hat with practiced politeness, "we've come with a generous offer for your spring." He pulled an envelope from his vest pocket. "The railroad is prepared to pay you $500, more than fair for a piece of water rights." Lucas stood silent, his face impassive as stone. The only movement was his hand, slowly rolling the envelope between his fingers without opening it. "That's good money," the second man added, his voice harder. "Enough to buy better land elsewhere. Maybe somewhere more suitable for a young wife." Anna's breath caught at the veiled threat. Through the window, she saw Lucas's jaw tighten, though his voice remained steady. "The spring ain't for sale, not at any price." The third man stepped forward, spurs jingling. "Now, Mr. Creed, don't be foolish. The railroad's coming through whether you like it or not. better to profit than stand in the way of progress? My answer is still no. Lucas handed back the unopened envelope. The leader's friendly manner disappeared like morning mist. You're making a mistake, Creed. There are consequences to defying the railroad. Legal consequences. He mounted his horse, looking down at Lucas. Don't say we didn't try to be reasonable. After they rode away, Lucas stood motionless on the porch for a long moment. Then he turned and went to saddle his horse. I need to speak with Elder Running Bear, he told Anna, checking his cinch. He knows the history of this land better than anyone. Will you be gone long? Anna asked, trying to hide her worry. Back before dark. He swung into the saddle. Bar the door while I'm gone. The Cherokee elder's home lay several miles away, nestled in a grove of ancient cottonwoods. Lucas found Running Bear sitting outside, carving a piece of wood with careful strokes. The old man looked up as Lucas approached, his weathered face creasing in welcome. I saw the railroad men riding away, Running Bear said, setting aside his carving. They visited you too? Lucas dismounted, accepting the offered seat beside the elder. They want the spring? Offered money. Running Bear nodded slowly. Ah, the sacred waters that sustain all life. He was quiet for a moment, watching a hawk circle overhead. Your father understood this. That is why my father entrusted the spring to his care, and he to yours. But there was no paper deed, Lucas said, voicing his fear. Just a promise between neighbors? A promise witnessed by the Creator is more binding than any paper, Running Bear said firmly. Water is life itself. It cannot be owned or sold like cattle or corn. He turned to face Lucas directly. If needed, I will speak of this promise before any judge. The words of our fathers must be honored. Lucas rode home through gathering clouds, his mind heavy with Running Bear's words. The law favored written deeds and contracts. He knew this. But the elders offered to testify kindled a small flame of hope back at the cabin. Anna had kept busy to ward off worry. The smell of fresh bread filled the air, and neat piles of mended clothes lay on the table. But Lucas saw the tension in her shoulders as she worked. Rain began to fall as evening approached, drumming steadily on the roof. They sat down to bowls of hot stew, but neither had much appetite. The silence between them was thick with unspoken fears. Anna finally broke it. What will happen if they try to take the spring? Lucas stirred his stew, choosing his words carefully. Running Bear will testify about the promise his father made to mine. It might help, might not. The railroad has powerful lawyers, but it's your land, Anna protested. Your spring. According to papers, yes. But they have ways of changing things. Legal ways that favor them. He pushed his bowl aside, untouched. Running Bear says water is sacred, says it can't be owned or sold. But I reckon the railroad don't see it that way. Thunder rolled in the distance as they cleared the table. Anna's hands shook slightly as she washed the dishes, and Lucas noticed how she jumped at every sound from outside that morning brought weak sunshine and a telegram rider. Lucas read the yellow paper with a grim expression before handing it to Anna. Land. Hearing, he said quietly, next week at the courthouse. They're moving fast? Anna's fingers tightened on the telegram until the paper crackled. What do they want you to bring? Deeds. Water rights papers. Proof of ownership. He shook his head. Everything I have, which ain't much compared to their lawyers. But you have Running Bear's testimony, Anna reminded him. The truth about the promise, Lucas nodded slowly. Aye, and maybe that'll count for something. But he trailed off, looking out the window toward the spring that bubbled eternally in the yard. The water that had sustained his family's ranch for 2 generations now threatened to become their undoing. Anna moved to stand beside him, her shoulder barely reaching his arm. Together they watched the spring water catch the morning light, each lost in thoughts of what they stood to lose. The ranch, their home, their fragile new beginning, all balanced now on the weight of a promise made between 2 families long ago, and whether that promise would stand against the railroad's paper might. The telegram lay on the table behind them, its message stark and clear. Their time of peace was ending. The real fight for everything they held dear was about to begin. The telegram's threat hung over them like storm clouds as Lucas headed out to mend fences. The steady rhythm of hammering posts helped calm his troubled mind. From the yard, the familiar scent of baking bread drifted on the breeze. Anna's fourth attempt that day. Lucas, her call brought him in from his work. She stood in the doorway, flour dusting her apron, holding up a fresh loaf. I think I finally got it right. He crossed the yard, boots leaving dusty prints on the worn planks of the porch. Inside, the cabin was warm from the cook stove. Anna cut 2 thick slices, her hands steady now where they had trembled that morning. Lucas took a bite, and his eyebrows rose in surprise. The bread was actually good, light and properly baked, nothing like her previous dense, doughy attempts. A smile tugged at his mouth. Well? Anna asked, watching his face anxiously. Reckon you've mastered it, he said. Reaching for another piece, Anna's delighted laugh filled the cabin, a rare sound that made the day's worries seem lighter for a moment. They shared the warm bread with fresh butter, this small victory. Bright spot in the darkness gathering around them dot as evening settled in. They completed their usual tasks, Lucas tending the horses in the barn while Anna prepared a simple supper. The night was quiet except for cricket song and the soft nickering of horses, until angry shouts shattered the peace. Fire. The barn's on fire. Lucas burst from the cabin, Anna close behind. Orange flames already licked up the barn's wooden walls, casting hellish light across the yard. Through the smoke, he glimpsed several riders disappearing into the darkness, their whoops of laughter carrying back on the wind. The horses, Anna cried. Lucas ran for the barn doors, throwing them open. Thick smoke poured out as panicked horses screamed inside. He plunged in, coughing, and began loosing them from their stalls. Anna grabbed the reins of those that bolted. Out, leading them to safety. Water, get the buckets. Lucas shouted, emerging with the last horse. They worked desperately, hauling water from the spring to throw on the flames. But the fire had too much of a hold. With a great groan of timber, the roof began to cave in. Back. Lucas grabbed Anna's arm, pulling her away as burning beams crashed down. Sparks shot skyward like a swarm of fireflies, carried on waves of intense heat. They could only watch as their barn, collapsed into a roaring inferno. The horses, huddled together in the pasture, eyes rolling white with fear. Anna counted them through tears of relief. All had made it out. But the barn, years of work, tools, feed, tack, wagon, all gone in minutes. Lucas stood rigid, fists clenched at his sides. In the firelight, his face was carved from stone, jaw muscles working as he stared at the destruction. Without a word, he strode to the cabin and emerged with his rifle. No, Anna ran to him, grabbing his arm. Lucas, please. Don't ride into. Town now, not like this. They need to pay, he growled, voice rough with smoke and fury. Can't let them think they can burn a man's livelihood and ride away laughing. They will pay, Anna insisted, maintaining her grip on his arm. Not with blood. Please, wait until morning. Don't let them make you into a murderer. Lucas's hands tightened on the rifle until his knuckles showed white. For a long moment, he stood frozen between rage and reason. Finally, his shoulders slumped slightly. Till dawn, he said, the words coming like they were torn from him. I promise nothing past that. They sat together in the smoke-filled yard, watching the barn burn down to glowing rubble. Anna trembled, as much from fear of what morning might bring as from the cooling night air. Lucas sat silent beside her, the rifle across his knees, his face illuminated by the dying flames. The eastern sky began to pale, revealing the full extent of the destruction. Where their sturdy barn had stood now lay a bed of gray ashes, still smoking in the dawnlight. Tools were twisted beyond repair, leather tack reduced to cinders, winter. Hey, nothing but char. The very foundation of their working life had been reduced to ruin in a single night of malicious violence. The horses, thankfully unharmed, grazed nervously in the pasture. But without the barn for shelter and storage, keeping them fed and cared for through the coming winter would be nearly impossible. The railroad men had struck a crushing blow, and they knew it. Lucas stood, rifle still in hand, as the sun crested the hills. His face was streaked with soot, his eyes red from smoke and lack of sleep. The rage still burned in him. Anna could see it in the set of his shoulders, the tension in his hands. But the night's vigil had banked it somewhat, turned white-hot fury to something colder and more controlled. Anna rose too, her skirts ashy and smoke-stained. "Lucas," she said softly, touching his arm. He looked down at her, and some of the hardness left his face. "I won't go shooting," he said quietly, "but this ain't over." They need to learn they can't burn man out of what's rightfully his. The morning breeze stirred the ashes, carrying away wisps of smoke from the ruins of their barn. Anna slipped her hand into his free one, feeling the tremors of contained anger still running through him. Together they stood watching the sunrise, both knowing that this attack was only the beginning of their fight to keep what was theirs. The first rays of sunlight painted the smoking ruins in shades of gold and gray. Lucas moved with grim purpose. His face set like stone as he saddled his horse. The rifle, cleaned and loaded in the pre-dawn hours, hung heavy in its leather scabbard against the horse's flank. His massive hands worked the straps with practiced efficiency, each motion betraying the fury still burning in his heart. Anna watched from the cabin doorway, her shawl pulled tight against the morning chill. The sight of Lucas preparing for violence made her stomach clench. This wasn't the gentle giant who had knelt in prayer that first night, who had given her the freedom to choose her own path. This was a man pushed to his breaking point, ready to answer fire with fire. She couldn't let him do this. Moving swiftly across the yard, Anna planted herself directly in Lucas's path as he turned to mount. Her eyes brimmed with tears, but her voice remained steady. "Lucas, wait." He paused, one hand on the saddle horn. "Step aside, Anna. This needs doing." "No." She lifted her chin, meeting his hard gaze. "Remember that night? The night you knelt by the hearth and prayed?" Lucas's jaw tightened, but she saw something flicker in his eyes, a crack in the armor of his rage. "You asked God for mercy," she continued, her voice soft but unwavering. "You thanked him for keeping me safe from violent men. If you ride into town now, with killing in your heart..." She reached for his rough hands, folding them between her smaller ones. "You'll lose that man. The man who showed me mercy. The man I've come to trust." Lucas stood frozen, his massive frame trembling slightly. The war between vengeance and virtue played across his features as clearly as shadow and light. "They burned everything we had," he said hoarsely. "Not everything." Anna squeezed his hands. "We still have the spring, we still have each other, and we still have our souls." She drew a shaky breath. "Justice doesn't need bloodshed, Lucas. Please." For a long moment, only the morning breeze stirred between them. Then, slowly, like a mighty tree bending before the wind, Lucas's shoulders slumped. He withdrew one hand from hers and reached for the rifle. Anna's heart stopped, until he turned and carefully leaned the weapon against the porch post. "You're right," he said quietly. "Can't fight evil with evil." Relief flooded through Anna so strongly her knees nearly buckled. But there was no time for weakness now. "We'll ride to town together," she said firmly. "As husband and wife, we'll seek justice the right way." Lucas nodded, some of the darkness leaving his face. He helped her mount her horse, then swung up onto his own. The rifle remained behind, a silent testament to chosen mercy. They rode slowly through the awakening landscape, hooves crunching on the frosted trail. Anna drew her worn shawl tighter, more for comfort than warmth. The morning wind whispered through the sage, carrying the sharp scent of wood smoke from their ruined barn. She offered silent prayers as they rode, asking for strength, for wisdom, for peace in Lucas's troubled heart. Beside her, Lucas sat straight in his saddle, his silence heavy with unspoken thoughts. Yet there was something different in his bearing. Now, not the coiled tension of a man bent on violence, but the steadier strength of one choosing a harder path. His hands held the reins loosely, no longer clenched in fury. The morning sun climbed higher as they made their way toward town, casting long shadows before them. Anna studied her husband's profile, seeing again the man who had knelt in tears. That first night, he had chosen mercy then when purchasing her freedom. Now she had helped him choose it again, turning him from a path of destruction. The bond between them, forged in that moment of shared vulnerability and strengthened through days of quiet trust, had just deepened into something stronger still. Not just protection, not just gratitude, but a true partnership where each could help the other stay true to their better nature. They rode on toward town, their shadows merging on the trail before them. The rifle lay behind, but justice still waited ahead. And they would face it together, armed not with bullets, but with the stronger weapons of truth and mercy. The town hall buzzed with tense whispers as townsfolk packed the wooden benches. Morning. Light streamed through tall windows, catching dust motes in its beams. Sheriff Danvers sat behind a broad desk at the front, his weathered face unreadable as he shuffled through papers. Anna perched on the edge of her seat beside Lucas, twisting the fabric of her skirt. The gambler lounged against the wall near the sheriff's desk, a smirk playing across his face as he toyed with a stack of official-looking documents. His fancy vest and watch chain gleamed in the sunlight, a stark contrast to Lucas's simple work. Elder Running Bear sat quietly in the front row, his dignified presence drawing curious glances from the townspeople. His silver hair caught the light, and his eyes held ancient wisdom as he waited patiently for his moment to speak. The sheriff's gavel cracked against wood, bringing silence to the room. This hearing concerns the disputed water rights of Spring Creek, claimed by both the railroad company and Lucas Creed, whose voice carried clearly through the hushed chamber. We'll hear both sides, then render judgment according to territorial law. The gambler stepped forward first, his boots clicking on the wooden floor. Simple matter, Sheriff. He spread several papers across the desk with a flourish. These deeds show clear railroad claim to all water rights in the territory. Properly filed and notarized. He cast a dismissive glance at Lucas. Some folks seem to think verbal agreements carry more weight than legal documents. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Anna's heart sank at the sight of those official stamps and signatures. But Lucas stood slowly, his huge frame unfolding like a mountain rising. Without a weapon at his hip, he seemed even more imposing, a man armed only with truth. Sheriff, Lucas's deep voice filled the room without raising it. I'd like Elder Running Bear to speak to how that spring came into my care. The Cherokee elder rose gracefully, his presence commanding immediate attention. He moved to stand before the sheriff's desk, raising his right hand in oath. Many winters ago, Running Bear began, his words measured and clear. That spring was known to my people as healing waters. When settlers came, there was much fear it would be fouled or drained dry. He gestured toward Lucas. This man's father helped my people when others showed only cruelty. Before he died, we entrusted the spring to his son's keeping, with the sacred promise it would never be sold or wasted. The gambler snorted, charming story. But verbal claims from Indians don't override proper deeds. A dangerous silence fell. Lucas's hands clenched, but Anna touched his arm gently, steadying him. Running Bear turned to face the crowd, his dignity unchanging. The water is life itself. It cannot be owned like a horse or a plow. The Creator gave it to all living things. He drew a folded paper from his vest. But for those who trust only written words, I have brought this. He handed the document to Sheriff Danvers, who adjusted his spectacles to read it. This appears to be a territorial treaty from 1853, guaranteeing Native peoples' right to designate sacred water sources that cannot be sold or transferred. The sheriff looked up sharply. And it's signed by the territorial governor himself. The gambler's smirk faltered. That's an old document. Still binding, Sheriff Danvers cut in. And Elder Running Bear's sworn testimony establishes Spring Creek as such a designated source. He set the treaty down firmly. The law may be written on paper, but it must respect sacred trusts, especially those made in good faith between neighbors. Whispers surged through the crowd. Anna noticed several townsfolk nodding, their expressions thoughtful as they looked at Lucas with new eyes. The sheriff raised his gavel. "By the authority of this court, I rule that Spring Creek remains under Lucas Creed's guardianship, protected from sale or transfer by both treaty law and sacred trust." The crack of the gavel echoed like a gunshot. The gambler's face twisted in fury as he snatched up his papers. "This isn't over," he snarled, storming toward the door. The railroad doesn't forget its enemies, but his threats seemed to lose power. In the morning light, townsfolk who had once jeered at Lucas and Anna now approached to shake hands, offering quiet words of support. Several women who had whispered cruel gossip about the bargain bride now smiled warmly, and a bear clasped Lucas's massive hand between his weathered ones. "You have honored your father's promise," he said softly. "The waters will continue to bring life." Anna felt tears prick her eyes as Lucas bowed his head in respect. This was the man she had come to know. Not a giant to be feared, but a guardian. Of sacred things they rode home together, as afternoon shadows lengthened across the plains. The sight of their burned barn still brought pain, but somehow its charred beams seemed less defeating now. They had lost much, but kept what mattered most: their spring, their honor, and each other. Lucas helped Anna down from her horse, his touch gentle despite his strength. They stood together, watching the spring's clear water bubble up from the earth, carrying its ancient promise of renewal. Tomorrow would bring the work of rebuilding, but for now, they simply let relief wash over them like the healing waters they had been chosen to protect. The morning after the hearing dawned bright and clear. Anna stood at the cabin door, watching a wagon approach through swirling dust. Her heart lifted at the sight of women from church, their arms laden with baskets and bundles. Behind them came another wagon filled with ranch hands, tools gleaming. In the sunlight, "We heard about the barn," Mrs. Peterson called out, climbing down with a covered dish. "Thought you folks might need some helping hands." Anna blinked back tears as more neighbors arrived. Even those who had whispered cruel words at the auction now offered sheepish smiles and willing assistance. Lucas emerged from behind the cabin, wiping sawdust from his hands, his expression softening at the gathering crowd. "Much obliged," he said quietly, dipping his head to the assembled helpers. The men wasted no time getting to work. Lucas directed them to salvage what they could from the burned barn while planning the new foundation. His deep voice carried across the yard as he explained his vision for a sturdier structure, broader than before with room for more horses. Inside the cabin, Anna found herself surrounded by church women organizing a makeshift outdoor kitchen. Mrs. Peterson showed her how to feed a large crew, multiplying her recipes to satisfy hungry workers. The older woman's eyes crinkled kindly as she guided Anna's hands through kneading enough dough for 12 loaves. "You're doing just fine, dear," she assured Anna. A woman keeping house on the frontier needs to know these things. By midday, the smell of fresh bread drew workers to the tables set up under the cottonwoods. Anna served thick slices with butter and preserves, her cheeks flushing at their enthusiastic praise. "Best bread I've had since leaving Missouri," declared old Mr. Thompson between bites. Other men nodded in agreement, and Anna felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the summer heat. Lucas moved among the workers, thanking each one personally. His massive frame bent easily to share stories and jokes, no longer the isolated giant they had once feared. Anna watched him with growing pride, seeing how naturally he led without commanding, guided without forcing. As afternoon shadows lengthened, the sound of hammers filled the valley. Men called to each other, sharing tools and advice. Women chatted as they prepared more food and handed out water. Where once silence had reigned, now laughter echoed off the hills. The new barn took shape quickly under many hands. Lucas insisted on using thicker support beams this time, determined to build something that would last generations. Every log was carefully chosen, every joint precisely fitted. Even the sheriff rode out to help one afternoon, perhaps making amends for past indifference. When dusk approached each day, The helpers would gather their things and head home, promising to return tomorrow. Anna and Lucas would sit together on the porch steps, watching fireflies dance in the gathering darkness. In these quiet moments, their walls began to lower. "I was alone so long," Lucas confessed one evening, his voice barely above a whisper. "After the fever took my family, I thought maybe God meant me to stay that way." Anna's hand found his in the darkness. "I felt the same after Father's deaths ruined us. Like I was marked somehow, meant for shame." "You never deserve shame," Lucas said firmly. The fireflies blinked around them like fallen stars as silence settled between them. Comfortable now rather than fearful. During the day, Anna threw herself into making their true home. She sewed curtains from fabric Mrs. Peterson brought, choosing cheerful patterns that brightened the rough-hewn walls. The simple act of hanging them made the space feel more permanent, more theirs. The women taught her frontier skills as they worked: how to preserve vegetables, tend a kitchen garden, doctor minor injuries. Anna soaked up their knowledge eagerly, no longer the frightened girl from the auction block. She found herself humming as she worked, surprising herself with moments of joy. Lucas noticed the changes in their home. His eyes would linger on the new curtains, the organized shelves, the flowers Anna had planted by the door. Though he said little, his gentle smile spoke volumes. The barn rose higher each day, sturdy walls reaching toward the sky. Men who had once mocked the giant's bargain bride now touched their hats respectfully. When speaking to Anna, she heard them praising Lucas's strength and fairness to newer workers, speaking of him as a natural leader rather than an oddity. Even the spring seemed to bubble more cheerfully, as if appreciating the renewed life around it. Children of the workers would splash in its shallows during breaks, their laughter mixing with birdsong and the steady rhythm of hammers dot as the final boards were nailed into place. Anna looked at their transformed homestead with wonder. The new barn stood proud and strong, larger than its predecessor. The cabin wore its curtains like a smile. The yard was worn smooth by friendly feet, and the kitchen garden sprouted promising green rows. But the greatest transformation was invisible to passing eyes. Where once two wounded souls had huddled in separate shadows, now stood partners who had chosen each other freely. Their bond had grown like the barn, built carefully, supported by community, stronger for being tested by fire. That evening, as the last helpers waved goodbye, Lucas and Anna stood together on their porch. The setting sun painted the new barn in shades of gold, while fireflies began their nightly dance above the spring. "Thank you," Anna said softly, "for giving me a real home." Lucas's large hand found hers, gentle as always. "Thank you for making it one." The late summer sun cast long shadows across the church steps as Lucas and Anna approached for Sunday service. 6 weeks had passed since the barn raising, and the morning air held the first hints of autumn Christmas. The church bells clear. Tones echoed across the square, calling the faithful to worship. Inside, the familiar scent of polished wood and well-worn hymnals greeted them. Anna smoothed her blue calico dress, the same one she'd worn nervously that first Sunday. But today, her steps were as steady as she followed Lucas down the aisle, instead of the cruel whispers that had once followed their entrance. Heads turned with warm recognition. Mrs. Peterson waved them toward her pew, while Mr. Thompson touched his hat respectfully to Lucas. Even the banker's wife, who had once turned away in disdain, offered a genuine smile. The preacher stood at his pulpit, sunlight streaming through the windows behind him. His sermon today seemed meant especially for them, though he never said so directly. He spoke of David sparing Saul, of mercy's victory over vengeance, of how choosing peace required more courage than choosing violence. "In our own community," he said, his voice carrying to the rafters, "we have witnessed such courage. When faced with destruction, some chose to rebuild rather than revenge. They showed us that God's way is not the way of blood, but of brotherhood." Lucas sat straighter in the pew, his massive shoulders set with quiet dignity. When the congregation rose to sing, Anna's voice lifted clear and strong with amazing grace. No longer did she whisper the words in fear. Beside her, Lucas's deep bass joined in perfect harmony. their voices weaving together like the threads of their shared life. The music filled the small church, and Anna felt tears prick her eyes. Not from shame this time, but from belonging. She remembered that first terrible auction day, how she had wished to disappear. Now she stood tall, a respected member of this community. After the final hymn, as people gathered outside to visit, something remarkable happened. Mrs. Peterson approached them first, extending an invitation to Sunday supper. Others quickly joined in, offering their own welcomes. Soon Lucas and Anna found themselves surrounded by neighbors, not onlookers, by friends, not judges. The afternoon passed pleasantly around the Petersons' table, filled with good food and better conversation. Anna shared her bread-making secrets with the younger wives, while Lucas discussed cattle prices with the men. No one mentioned the auction or the railroad fight. Those days were past. Evening found them back at their cabin, the setting sun painting the new barn in shades of amber. They sat in their usual spots on the porch, listening to the crickets begin their nightly chorus. The oil lamp cast a gentle glow through Anna's. Curtains making the cabin look especially homey, Lucas broke their comfortable silence. "I need to thank you proper," he said softly, "for stopping me that morning after the fire. I was blind with rage, ready to destroy everything." Anna turned to face him, her expression gentle in the lamplight. "You saved me first," she replied. "That night you knelt and prayed, showing me what kind of man you truly were." She reached out, touching his weathered hand. "You never bought me, Lucas," she said, her voice strong with conviction. "You gave me back my life." The words hung in the warm evening air between them, more binding than any auction receipt or marriage certificate. In the distance, the spring bubbled softly, while fireflies began their dance above the garden Anna had planted. Their home stood peaceful around them, built on mercy, strengthened by trust, and now blessed with love, freely given. Golden evening light spilled through the cabin windows as Anna stirred the thick stew simmering on the iron stove. The aroma of fresh-baked bread filled the warm air, mingling with the sharp scent of pine from the newly swept floors. Lucas moved about the room, his large frame casting shadows as he lit the oil lamps one by one. A gentle knock at the door announced Elder Running Bear's arrival. The Cherokee elder's weathered face creased with a smile as he entered, carrying a bundle of dried herbs as a gift. His presence filled the cabin with quiet dignity. "Welcome to our home," Anna said softly, pulling out a chair at the rough-hewn table. The elder nodded, settling into his seat as Lucas poured fresh spring water into tin cups. Before they ate, Elder Running Bear raised his hands in blessing. His deep voice carried ancient wisdom as he spoke of water's sacred nature, of promises kept, and of the good spirits that watched over those who protected the land. Anna bowed her head, touched by the blessing of belonging his words bestowed. Good. Stew steamed in earthen bowls as they shared the simple meal. Stories and laughter flowed freely around the table, punctuated by the comfortable sounds of spoons against bowls and the breaking of warm bread. The elder spoke of seasons past, of how the spring had sustained his people long before settlers came. Lucas listened intently, understanding anew the weight of his guardianship. After the meal, Anna stepped out onto the porch, drawn by the first evening stars appearing in the darkening sky. The new barn stood solid against the twilight, the soft sounds of settling livestock drifting on the breeze. Behind her, the cabin glowed with lamplight and fellowship. Lucas joined her, his arm settling naturally across her shoulders. The gesture spoke of protection, of partnership, of a journey from strangers to family. Anna leaned into his strength, remembering how far they had come. "We began with $3, she whispered, her voice catching with emotion, "but God gave us something richer." Lucas's smile held all the humility that had first won her trust. The night wind carried the eternal song of the spring, water flowing clear and strong through the darkness. Its music spoke of life preserved, of mercy's triumph, and of love that had grown wild and free in the shelter of faith. Inside, Elder Running Bear's deep laughter mingled with the homey sounds of their evening. They were no longer the giant and his purchased bride, but A family blessed by dignity, restored, and grace, freely given. If today's story reminded you of the quiet strength of love, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow we'll meet right here, where love speaks softly and stays.